This is the last word, and I'm Marya Shakil. Iran and Israel conflict today saw a dramatic escalation with both sides pounding each other with missiles, leading to heavy damage. While Israel targeted Iranian infrastructure, including airports and security installations, Iran bombed a power plant in Israel's Ashdod city, which is the Ashdod city, in fact. So is the crisis going to escalate further, or is there any chance of negotiations which can actually possibly bring this to an end? A crucial angle is the role of Iran's allies, Russia and China, both big powers, and UNSC, which is United Nations Security Council permanent members. How are the two countries going to play their cards in the coming days becomes very, very crucial. That's what I'm going to decode in the next few minutes. First up, what has been the stand of Russia and China so far? Russia has condemned Israel's airstrikes on Iran, calling them a clear violation of UN Charter and established principles of international law. And Russian officials, remember, have warned that these actions could lead to a full-scale war in the Middle East. Additionally, Russia strongly condemned the US bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities, labeling it as an unprovoked aggression. President Vladimir Putin, in fact, emphasized that Moscow is making efforts to assist Tehran in the wake of these attacks. On the other hand, now, China. China has also expressed deep concern over the escalating conflict. Chinese President Xi Jinping condemned Israel's military actions, stating that they infringe upon Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity. China also described them as serious violations of international law and UN Charter. But the question is, why are the two countries not moving beyond lip service of condemnation? Is this because of deep, perhaps some kind of they do not know in which direction it's all headed? Because these two countries, remember, have deep-rooted ties and extensive collaboration. But the silence, certainly, one would say, is deafening. I'm going to start with Russia. What is the nature of a relationship that is there between Iran and Russia? These two countries' relationship or equation has evolved significantly over the years. In fact, on January 17th, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Iranian President Masoud signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty in Moscow. This treaty aims to strengthen bilateral relations over the next 20 years, covering areas such as defense, counterterrorism, energy, finance, and culture. And despite these ties, Russia's stance remains cautious. The partnership, while strategic, is not a full-fledged alliance. Diverging agendas and economic limitations play a role in this cautious approach. Now, let's look at China. The Iran-China partnership, right here, the Iran-China partnership has entered a new era of strategic interactions, highlighted by the signing of the 25-year comprehensive strategic partnership agreement in 2021, in fact. This agreement aims to enhance cooperation in economic development, technological collaboration, and infrastructure development. Iran, remember, is a crucial player in China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is the BRI, which is serving as a gateway to energy, supply chains, and markets. And despite these significant ties, China's major state-owned enterprises and banks remain reluctant to fully engage due to risk of sanctions. So why this silence? The answer lies in the complex web of geopolitical dynamics. Both Russia and China have their own strategic interests and constraints. For Russia, the partnership with Iran is shaped by systemic pressures and tensions with the West. For China, the alignment of domestic socio-economic interests drives cooperation, but the threat of sanctions looms large. Let me ask that question to the guests who are joining me on the show tonight. Einar Tangen is a senior fellow. He's joining me from Beijing. We also have Tatiana, who is a senior journalist. I'm going to begin with you, Tatiana. You know, there is a great degree of caution on the part of the Russians. You're joining me from Moscow. What is it that Kremlin is thinking?
Good evening. Well, I don't understand where you're getting caution in any of what has been happening over the weekend. Russia has condemned the attack. However, to comment on what you had been describing as, the strategic cooperation agreement that Russia indeed signed with Iran this year, outlines that should one of the parties fall victim to aggression, then the other party should not in any way help the aggressor, which is exactly what Russia has been doing. It's condemned the aggression. There's a saying, at least in Russia, we say that one should not inflict help. So that would, to explain it to your viewers, it is not help if you inflict it on someone. So to require, if Iran require some sort of assistance militarily, then it would definitely, and I believe that it would, ask for such assistance. But the only country that I know of, for instance, that does in fact inflict assistance is usually the US, because it decides that it needs to assist someone and doesn't ask the person or the country it's assisting, whether it needs it or not. It just does, as it did with Syria, for instance.
Okay, so the same question to perhaps Einar Tangen. How are you looking at the developments, and is there a sense in Beijing that there should not be any military assistance at the moment? They would rather wait and see as to how far will US go in supporting Israel?
All right. Thank you for having me on the show. The pronunciation of my name is Einar Tangen.
Okay.
What you have is a situation where you have two nuclear powers, Russia and China. The idea that they would wade in at this point and in essence say, look, we're going to support this, we're going to start a war. And that's not going to end very well. I mean, India itself has been very much on the line in terms of what it's doing. It hasn't joined in any resolutions. It's talking to both sides, but it's being cautious. Why? Because Donald Trump has embarked on a road where there is no end game. I mean, it's not like the Straits of Hormuz suddenly cropped up last night during the bombing. Here's a fact. They knew, and they've always known, that if they get in a tangle with Iran, it's more than likely that they will close the Straits of Hormuz. And, despite what Donald puffs and brags about that will punish them, it would take months to clear that. Meanwhile, his base, the MAGA base, he promised there would be no more foreign adventures, forever wars, they're like, well, what are you doing? Prices are going up. Oil prices are going to go up if the U.S. does that, because during that period when they're trying to demine and take over the Straits of Hormuz, guess what? They're going to have to. No one's going to get through there. So this idea that everyone should be jumping into this cesspool that Donald Trump has created is nonsense. What you have to do is simply wait for him to destroy himself. Be the adult in the room. Be ready to help. Not necessarily act like an 11-year-old on the playground who thinks he can punch people and that somehow this will get them to give him their lunch money.
Yes, Mr. Tangen, you said the right thing here, that not everyone has to behave the way the US president is behaving, and but we have seen United States go ahead and bomb Iran and crucial nuclear facilities. So then what should be the stance of other countries? Perhaps be cautious as China, Russia, India are doing? Or are you sensing that because there seems to be no end game, and what really can be the end game here, and who decides the end game? Because Is Israel going to decide the end game now, or will it be United States?
Well, right now, a lot of people feel that Israel is calling the shots and Donald Trump is dancing to their tune. He went from Emperor Taco to being Netanyahu's puppet. It's very, very strange. I mean, it just on the face of it, if you're going to take action, who do you call? You would call your national security advisor on something like this. Do they or do they not have nuclear weapons? Answer, no. Then, if you need, you don't trust your own national security advisor, although you just appointed her a few months ago, you could go to the IAEA. They're on the ground. They know everything that's going on, and if there's a problem, they point it out. You could ask them, are there any kind of nuclear weapons? And they'd said, no. So what you have is a president who acted without information, right, to start bombing a country that would have repercussions. And he seems surprised. I mean, you have Marco Rubio. I could give you a list of things he said about China, that they started the virus, that they're the worst country in the world, that they're an enemy to democracy, that, basically the only thing he didn't say is they eat little children. And yet he's reaching out and saying, well, China should do something here. He doesn't point out that the U.S. created the problem. All he wants to do is talk about how China should solve it. And this seems to be a very consistent refrain. Going to economic war with China when they control 90% of their rare earths, and you need those rare earths for your missiles and all your cars and all your industry, and then being surprised. Oh my gosh, they have 90% of the world's rare earths. It's not like they didn't know before. And this is my point about Donald Trump. He ignores everything in front of him and acts as a showman. He wants to have impact, but his impact, unfortunately, has consequences. And realizing this, having other people rush in and try to do what? What are you going to do? Threaten nuclear war against the U.S.? Oh, come on. There has to be adults in the room, and it's definitely not Trump.
Okay. Tatiana, just a few minutes ago, the NATO has issued a statement. In fact, the Secretary General, Mark Rutte, has given strong warnings to Russia, calling Moscow the most immediate threat to the alliance and accusing Tehran of expanding its role in the Ukraine conflict. It has gone on to say, if Russia were to attack us today, our response would be devastating. And the most significant and direct threat facing this alliance is Russia.
Well, they're in damage control mode, Marya. This is very simple. NATO has, again, there's a very popular meme going around the internet, and it has been for several years now, showing, the Russian aggression. In the meantime, NATO expanding towards Russia, and they still call it Russian aggression. NATO has been expanding and always using Russia's alleged, this evil image of Russia as an excuse for expansion of NATO. Right now, with Donald Trump doing what he did, I don't, necessarily agree that he always acts as a showman. However, I have to agree with my counterpart, is that I don't see the end game necessarily here for the US. If it was supposed to be a targeted kind of, we go in, we strike, and then we're kind of out, it doesn't work this way. There will be repercussions. Iran will not just sit idly and, just take it, because that would not come out well on the media front or on the international scale. Such strikes, such actions only strengthen the leadership in Iran, if anything, because, if the alleged, change of regime that has been mentioned in Western media over and over again was the end game, it doesn't happen this way, because any aggression from a third party, from a strong third party, it strengthens the people and the support of the people around their government. So that will not work. And unfortunately, NATO, and with the US being and having been the driving force of NATO for so many years, it has to go on the offensive as means to defend its credibility. Of course, the very simple target here would be Moscow and saying that Moscow is the aggressor. However, we need to be very clear about the situation as it unfolds. The only solution to this, in theory, would be negotiations. However, I don't see, with what has happened over the weekend, how such negotiations should take place at this moment.
And who will initiate that negotiation?
Well, look,
because
it's not...
the talks in Geneva technically have failed, and there is no peacemaker here. Who's going to play that role?
And they have failed, don't get me wrong, they have failed because of a very simple fact, because the US has taken this step to attack. So Donald Trump has no patience. We've seen this many times, when he goes into negotiations with Russia and then he loses his patience, he calls President Putin God knows what, and then he comes back to the table because Russia is very obviously not Iran. It is a nuclear power. He then goes into trade war with China, and then he goes off again at the Chinese leadership, and then he comes back to negotiations. It does work well with his manipulation of social media. It doesn't work very well in the long run, or even in the short term, in international politics. So at this moment, I believe the worst part is that the UN, for now, the UN Security Council has decided not to immediately condemn this action. And there is a huge pressure, in my personal point of view, a huge pressure on the UN to act as what it's supposed to be. Not what it has been for the past decades, but what it's supposed to be in the UN Security Council, to assume its role as a political entity that needs to intervene here.
Which certainly they are not playing any role. We saw that role completely being diminished in one conflict after another. Tatiana and Einar, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.